This is The Extra Mile.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to The Extra Mile. I'm Justin Duncan, your co-host, and I'm always here with my illustrious colleague, G5. Hey, George, how are you today?
Hello. Good morning. We are here with Coach Gomez. He is he's a local coach here at LCU, women's basketball coach. He's been amazing in the community. I've only heard good things about him. So we thought we'd have him come on. We look at his expertise and see what we can learn. We always have something to learn from other people.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm intrigued by the G5, but I guess we won't go into that today.
No, I'm always interested because I keep forgetting.
Most listeners already know, but the idea is I'm George Loomis V, and so they will call me for short G5. And we all have my dad G4, G3. It's kind of like a thing, but it's also just a thing that people catch on to, and they're like, "Oh wow, that's really cool," and they'll just call me that. So
great ancestry.
Yeah. I have 2 daughters, and they're the best. I love my daughters.
Georgia?
Yeah. Nope. No Georgia.
No Georgias.
Paige was like, "Nah, that's
Georgina.
not happening." Yeah. But, man, well, thank you for coming on.
Certainly.
Yeah. How's the season been? Good?
Yeah, tremendous. Every year is sort of a new adventure. Even if you don't lose many players, just the changing of 1 or 2 parts of a team can really just change the dynamic. A lot of times for the good. I love teams, and this has been a really energetic, a younger team. And so we started off with an incredibly difficult schedule. We went and played 2 games in Kansas City, sort of an Elite 8 type field of teams, and lost 2 games, one by 1 point, and then one in overtime.
Ugh, wow.
So 3 points, a difference of that. If we have 1 point in regulation and 2 points in that other game, we're 2-0 over those games. But tremendous experience, and then we came home and played 2 this weekend at home.
Okay.
We're able to win 2 games, so we're on a good pace right now. Really fun team.
Good. And you said just the change of 2 players changes a whole dynamic or a big aspect of that?
Yeah, last year we graduated 5 seniors from the previous team, and so there's a pretty big turnover. But some teams, if just any change of personnel at all, changes the dynamic, and so that's always the joy of coaching, of figuring out each team, what are the dynamics, how are we going to make this work strategically, but also relationally. Now, that's so much a part of women's basketball teams is how do they gel. And so this has been a really transition in terms of change of strategy, but the culture is still very, very strong. It's still the same great family atmosphere for our team.
Good.
It's just we have some younger players, and so we lost 5 veterans that had been there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard.
Sense.
When you, like your senior, it's this institutional memory that just sort of leaves. That's got to be really challenging every year, having to almost reinvent the wheel.
Well, and the perceptive part of that is what you teach over the course of years, having 5 girls that have been there, some 4 and 3 of them 5 years. You just sort of assume they know what's going on, and so it's been really good for me to remember. I need to really teach exactly what we're doing, what we want, as opposed to assuming they know because they've been there so long.
Yeah.
So it's a good challenge for me to communicate clearly and more often, and not just go in thinking, well, they should know this because we've done it before.
Right. Makes sense. There's a lot to unpack there, but I want to go back a little bit. What's your journey? What's your journey to faith? Like, how'd that start before we dive into coaching?
Yeah, that's always an interesting. Everybody has their own unique stories, and stories are so fun. For me, growing up in a family, my dad was in the Air Force. We traveled. I was born in Indiana. We traveled all over, even to Germany, South Dakota, New Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Ended up in Texas, but my parents, they were faithful. My mom grew up a Lutheran.
Okay.
And so she had some German background in her family. My dad coming from Puerto Rico, probably more of a Catholicism background, just a cultural faith for them. When we were, my dad was away fighting in a war, my mom sort of came to get to know someone in the churches of Christ, and so sort of started just looking at things differently. So it wasn't that she didn't have faith, it's just sort of a transformation. And those times back then, we were pretty denominational, which hopefully we've gotten away from. But sort of that was the development of her faith, and so they just sort of began looking at things differently. So for me growing up, I grew up just going to churches. In Arlington, Texas, that was sort of junior high school years. And so that's sort of when you begin really, at least being aware of faith and of, what's going on here, the big picture of life. And so I sort of came to faith in those years, growing up junior high school, baptized in junior high. A lot of kids, they go through that, well, it's time.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I really get this. Interesting story. Even in South Dakota, I was in 5th grade in South Dakota. I sort of had an idea of, I think I want to be baptized, just because it was sort of the thing. Went forward. This may be I don't know how often this happens to people. I went forward. Excuse me. And the minister, he sort of asked me a couple questions, and I guess at that time he felt like I wasn't prepared. So he kicked me back to the back, and so I was rejected from baptism in 5th grade. Sort of an odd.
And that didn't turn you off
It
at
did
all?
not at all. It was like, well, okay, there's something more to this, obviously, than just coming up and getting wet.
That's a good attitude to have.
So anyways, again, over the course of the time, high school, you have a faith, almost more I'm getting to know the facts as opposed to I'm getting to deepen a relationship. And you go to college, came here to Lubbock Christian University. Those are the years where you sort of begin, okay, I'm on my own now. Fortunately, my sister lived here. Her husband, my brother-in-law, was a minister at church here in Lubbock. So I had a good connection to a spiritual family when I came. So I wasn't just left orphaned on my own to figure it out. But just over those college years, early adult years, you sort of start just growing in your knowledge and your depth and your understanding. So I don't know that there was a transformational moment of I came to faith. As we continue, even now as a old man, there's so much to learn. There's just so much, and so faith continues to grow.
But you said that made sense to you, which I think is unique from others. That just is like, this is time, or this is what I'm encouraging to do.
Right. Yeah, there wasn't just a landmark of this is my moment of faith. I think another big, really honestly, a big thing of faith development for me over the years has been the opportunity to travel the world, to be able to go so many different places because of basketball, because of our congregation's mission work in Africa, just opportunities as a child growing up in the Air Force to see the big world. It gives you just a fuller picture of God and of faith and of, people. So that's been really helpful in my development too over the years.
What insights did you glean from your travels? Because I feel the same way. I was probably semi well traveled. Went to Europe several times in my earlier years, and I really think that shaped the way that I look at life and people and how they interact, their needs, their desires, their wants.
Yeah, just again that perspective we can gain from just realizing people all over the world are wonderful. There's so many different ways that they approach life. For me, one of the big moments of faith development for me was in Buenos Aires, Argentina. We went there for USA Basketball. We were playing. I was helping coach a team. We were at the America's Cup in Argentina. We went to an really very old Catholic cathedral. Mm-hmm. We're just walking around it. The Pope had been there, I guess, the year or two before. It was sort of a big landmark in that place. But we're just in the team. We're walking around and just sort of looking and observing. And we were sort of towards the entrance. I saw an old lady. She may have been 80, 90, old lady. She sort of just shuffles in, doesn't look very healthy, sort of an old, maybe unhealthy. She sort of shuffles in with her head down. She walks there's a big crucifix as Jesus on the cross, sort of towards the entrance of that place. And she walks in very, understatedly and just sort of walks up next, kneels down, sort of bows her head in front of that. And then after 2 or 3 minutes gets up and walks out. It was just sort of a moment of, that is some real faith. That's some true faith. It's not any showy act. It wasn't some, major speech she gave. It was just a small act of faith that made me think, there's so many ways to have a relationship and to honor God with what we do. Mm-hmm. And to me, it was just impactful. Again, it sort of sounds like that's not a big deal, but just observing that made me think, wow, that's true humble faith.
She sees and realizes what Jesus has done.
Right. It was just a total act of just honor, of humility, of thanks. I don't even know it all because I don't know what was in her heart. But for me watching that, it was.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying and agree. And for different cultures, like say in Europe, to grow up around a cathedral, which these are massive structures, massive structures. I'm a musician, and so, going and performing in these spaces, hearing the acoustics, it really shapes a different perception of, wow, to grow up around this. And it's so funny because they just sort of like, oh, the cathedral's in the way. I have to walk around the cathedral to get to the cafe, and we're just sitting here in awe looking at these gargoyles and all the carvings and such. And then, but these being almost icons of, Catholicism and all of the things that it brought to those nations in world history. But to have a closed-minded concept of, well, these places are not places of faith or what have you, they could be very impactful in God's work. And so I really are very interested in those type of concepts, people who've traveled and seen different cultures. I've actually never been to South America, so that's really interesting hearing that about Buenos Aires and Argentina. And so that's so neat that you had those opportunities, and what a blessing that is to go. And your ministry work in Africa sounds fantastic.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, our congregation, Quaker Avenue Church of Christ, has been in Kenya and Uganda and South Sudan for almost 40-plus years. And so it's sort of grown up as just part of who we are, what we do there. And as a member there, so we take our youth group there every 3 years to keep the congregation connected with that work. And so it's not just something that, they do over there and we just fund it. We're intricately involved in it. So that's been a big part of it too, and just seeing, how faith lives out in different cultures and how joyful those people are in spite of at times what they don't have,
right? And
how, but then at the same time, the community that is formed there, how much they value just togetherness.
That's fantastic. Well, I know that those are great conversations to have, and I'm very interested in what brought you to basketball. It seems you growing up in Indiana, that probably is what connected you to that sport.
Fascinating that I was born in Peru, Indiana, which is a very small town. Maybe fitting it's known, or it was known, as the circus capital of the world. Every summer they'd have big circus acts that would come through there. So I guess that's why I'm a clown. I don't know if that sort of goes with. But I was there just for 1 year. Basically, my 1 and 2 year old, I think. I don't remember, but I didn't have any formative years there, except my babyhood. And so with my dad not really being involved in athletics at all, my mom, not being an athlete at all. My older brother, I have an older brother 7 years older than me, and he, as a young kid, junior high, high school, played football, played basketball, was involved in sports. And so, having an older brother you sort of look up to, and he probably was the one that got me involved in playing any sports. And so then through junior high years in Arlington, Texas, I played football, played basketball, run track. And again, I sort of grew early, so I was probably maybe 6'1" or 6, my height now when I was a freshman or so.
Oh, wow.
So sometimes, the tall kids play basketball. And so through high school at Arlington High, I stopped playing other sports and just played basketball and just really enjoyed it. Loved being part of a team, loved playing the sport. Had a chance to come to Lubbock Christian University pretty much as a walk-on. Just my sister was here, like I mentioned, and looking for a good college to go to. Again, not necessarily having huge career thoughts at the time. Just, hey, I want to go there. They let me play basketball. So that's how it sort of got to be a college situation. Then again, looking for a job I was a math major at LCU, so I was looking, obviously, to teach. I thought I might want to coach. Wasn't sure, but at the time I didn't really have a coaching opportunity out of college. So I signed a contract with Levelland to teach math. But fortunately, a guy who just really changed my life, Vic Self, who now works with us at LCU, he was coaching at Monterey. He transitioned into the head coach job late in the summer, right after my senior year in college, and they were looking for an assistant coach. He, having played at LCU, also asked Coach Copeland, who was our men's coach, hey, I need an assistant coach. You know anybody? I just graduated. So he came, talked to me. Levelland let me out of my contract late, and right at the beginning of August, and so I got an opportunity to start coaching at Monterey, which is incredibly a blessed opportunity because most people come out of college, you don't get to go be an assistant coach at a big school, high-quality basketball program. So that was sort of the open door that I stepped through that got me into coaching.
That's fantastic. So you did have a mentor in coaching.
Yeah, still do. One of them, Robert Gill, who was my high school assistant coach when I was at Arlington, he traveled with us to Kansas City. He still is very involved in our team, in my life. We love to have him come stay at our house here in Lubbock when he comes to town. He was impactful. Coach Copeland, the men's coach at LCU, who still lives here in Lubbock, and so we get together fairly often when he's in town. But then Vic Self, who now is my assistant, he's an assistant coach with us with Casey Wilson at LCU. So I think it's been 20 years of my 35 years. Either he's been the head coach and I've helped him, or the other way around.
What does mentorship really look like to you?
Those are really, it's just maybe watching, listening, observing, being together, spending time together. I don't know that it's a strategic, hey, I'm your mentor, you're my mentee, let's figure this out.
Right.
It's just sort of a living life, observing and earning and gaining respect by the way things happen.
Just an organic process, organic relationship.
It really has and I know there are times that we need to be strategic. Even our congregation, we want older members to try to mentor the younger ones and be intentional about it. But, in our case, it's just sort of the longer you live life together, the more you just sort of like naturally pick up habits from each other, good and bad. But so that has really been fortunate to have that, wisdom lived out in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was thinking about your process there, and 2 Peter 3:18 kind of came to mind. It says, "But grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ." This is kind of and to Him be the glory both now and the day to eternity. I think the idea of knowledge and growing in that knowledge has kind of been a theme in so far what you've told me.
Yeah. I mean, that's, you always want to hear that lifelong learner concept of, in coaching, it's really important. The game sort of changes over time in a lot of ways when some of the things really stay exactly the same. But you want to continue to find different ways to do things. People talk about kids, they're changing, you have to change with the times. And even in fact, we hear that a lot, we've got to adjust to the culture. I mean, there's some wisdom in that. But there's also some things you say, we're just not going to change this. And so growing in knowledge for me is keeping a nimble mind, keeping an open mind enough to search for some different things. I just like to read, reading, continuing to search for
things that work.
Things that work, things that maybe you've assumed were one way all your life. I got to continue to challenge this and not just accept it because I've just gotten in the habit of accepting it. Now, an example like for basketball, some drills after 5, 6, 10 years, you're doing a drill like, why am I doing this? Is it because my high school coach did it, and so now I'm, it's always we just need to keep challenging our thought process. Again, without being so, whatever it is, changeable that you never settle on anything for a foundation, but
right, the classic.
I think there's some basic foundations that we don't negotiate, but then a lot above that, man, we got to think about it more.
Mm-hmm. Right. You don't want to be so open-minded, as they say, your brain falls out. Type stuff,
certainly.
Right? Yeah.
And that's a danger. But there's some foundational things. I think it's 1 Corinthians. He says, these are the fundamental principles. Jesus, he lived, he died, he rose again.
Yeah, 1 Corinthians 15.
This is fundamental. And once you have that foundation of fundamentals, a lot of other things, you can be pretty creative above that.
Yeah, right. Makes sense. And that's just going to help you, especially in your profession as coaching, progress a little bit more. Be a better team, be a stronger team, I assume.
Yeah. There's, I think Coach K, he mentioned just how much over the years, he had such an illustrious career and just amazing. But how people saw how much he changed with the landscape of players, of strategies. And so I just think that you have to do that in a team setting, in an athletic setting, because I guess the old wing tee doesn't, or whatever, the wishbone, back in our days in football was innovative. And now if people did it, they may come back. It's one of those things that may come back again, but you sort of have to roll with the changes without just letting them push you out of what you're really good at. And
Right.
so, that's sort of the fun of, again, I have teams of figuring out, what does this team do well? I don't want to do this with them if it's what we did last year and that team was good at, but this team isn't.
Mm-hmm.
There's just a lot of different ways of approaching it. And so athletic strategy it's sort of fascinating. I just want to keep thinking and not just do what we've done, because even if it's worked, sometimes you have to say, well, we need to do something different. It's time.
Tapping into that strategy, how do you handle the different personalities you come across in coaching? I imagine there's some hardheads, some A-type personalities, comes to a team.
I think the key is Casey Wilson's my assistant. Having a female assistant with a female team
Is that helpful?
is probably the biggest key I can think of, because
Shout out.
because sometimes I a lot of times I say she's really my interpreter. She interprets what the girls are thinking, saying, feeling, and tells me, and then she takes what I'm saying and tries to translate it to them. Because even doing girls athletics for 20 years now, guys, sometimes we're not in tune enough with what something sounds like, what something means, what the signals we're getting. And so, but dealing with personalities, that's sort of the joy of team. That's because those different personalities, when you can get them all giving themselves up, keeping their personality, not trying to, hey, you need to be different. But a big part for us is knowing those personalities before they get here, and not being shocked after 4 months with a player that I didn't know you were like this. We really want our recruits to know who we are, and we want to know who they are and their family before they come. So it goes so much beyond a basketball player. We want to fit. And it's, again, the key to that is our players giving us approval of recruits, because they've spent time with them. And so they have some input on whether they feel like a player coming in is going to fit or not. Because if they're a great player but they're not going to mesh, that's sort of hard for me as a coach to say, well, I don't care. We want her, and so you're going to have to get along with it. So the personalities have to be fleshed out a little before the team begins to form for the first time. So that's a lot of it. And again, a lot of communication. We just have to sit down with kids a lot and just talk and get to know them.
Yeah.
We do a lot of individual meetings with our players and get to know them.
Like, what's the number one thing you're looking? I don't know very much about sports, just FYI. I'm very bad. Paige is my wife. She's the one that keeps me informed as best she can. But I didn't grow up around it. So when you're looking for players, what's the number one thing you're looking for? I mean, is it straight up just talent, or is it
right? And obviously, as a college basketball team, they need to be able to play basketball well. I mean, that's But again, for some people, that's a lot of different things. It could be if they play great defense, or if they can really shoot. Or for us, when we look at a basketball, we want a fundamental, a kid that's skilled in multiple ways, not one-dimensional. But after they fit those physical attributes, really what we look for is someone who is a really great teammate. I mean, what's someone that watching them in high school or in a summer tournament or going to watch them practice, they look like a great teammate, someone that's into their teammates and not into themselves. And there's little things you can see on video, how they react to an official's call, how do they react going to the sideline on a timeout, when they're subbed in or out of the game, what do they look like? So there's a lot of intangibles that go so much beyond, hey, that kid's a really good dribbler or whatever.
Statistics.
And then the interaction a lot of times with them, with their families or their parents when they come to visit, if it's the parent that are really pushing the whole agenda and the kid is sort of just along for the ride. So there's some qualities that go beyond the norm. And for me, the biggest one for us is just having someone that's sacrificial. I mean, finding kids that are intelligent and sacrificial. Because when they come visit, we'll have them watch video even with them and ask them questions about, what do you see here? Because the game is so much more than the body. It's the mind. It's the thought process. And we're never going to be so talented physically that it doesn't matter how we work together. And so that mental part of it, the ability to observe and think, that's a huge part of it as well. So someone that looks, they're sacrificial, they're a great teammate, but they're also can process well. is really big.
I like that point. Sacrifice, I think, is a big one. I didn't think about that being a big issue, but if you have a team, sacrifice also takes a certain level of humility too. So in a team, humility, I assume, is going to be pretty essential. And then having that sacrifice, now you're putting, I guess, other players ahead of yourself.
That's, I think for all the years, even back when I was at Cooper, probably a foundational verse, if we were like, what's a key statement or verse for your team or program? It's Philippians 2, that whole chapter there, but just doing nothing out of selfishness or conceit, but in humility, consider others above yourselves. And it's not saying don't consider yourselves, it's just make sure you're considering others above yourself. And don't do anything out of selfishness or conceit, but consider others. Always considering others as a teammate. To consider, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. That verse also, it just tells you, just do your job, be quiet, do your job, work. I'll tell them in practice. Well, I don't know if I've stopped them this year, but if there's a ball rolling on the floor, somebody won't dive on it. You think, hey, Jesus carried the cross and was crucified. You can't even dive on the floor for that ball. I mean, when you look in terms of comparative sacrifice, what we're asking you to do is not that big a deal. But you need to learn to love to do that. I mean, you need to seek opportunities to elevate someone else and give yourself up. Kids these days, that's not the natural way they're being told in youth sports. It's always, how many points did you score? If I'm not happy, I'm going to move to this team.
Just in the culture in general, it's about me.
Sure.
It seems like. Oh.
And I really believe that, I think all of us deep down love it when we have an opportunity we find out how much joy there is in giving yourself up. But we just aren't forced to do that enough. So kids, once they do it, they sort of, this is refreshing. It's a good way to go. And I even had a coach talk to me this past weekend about, a lot of teams are going quick fix in like transfer portal or all these things where kids, if they're not happy, they're not playing, they're going to go to another school, they're going to move. Mm-hmm. And, we want to continue. He was just saying, so do you have kids that actually, when they come as freshmen, they're willing to wait a year or two before they get to play a lot? And that's what we've done, and that's what we're going to keep doing. He said, I just don't know that, it's just hard to find kids that are that patient. And I thought, well, that's true. I mean, that is true, but we're not going to give in and just say, that's true. We'll just start getting kids for a year or two, and if they don't like it, they can leave. We want them to develop patience, long-suffering, those qualities that really, in the long run, are going to benefit them as a parent.
You pointed out Philippians chapter 2, just like as we read that, I mean, it says, therefore, if there is any encouragement in Christ, any comfort provided by love, any fellowship in the Spirit, any affection of mercy. I love this because you're talking about how giving really is a joy, or should be a joy. Paul says, complete my joy and be of the same mind by having the same love, being unified in the Spirit. So there's the idea of unity in a team, right? And having, one purpose. So a team should have one purpose instead of being motivated by selfish ambition and vanity, but in humility, be moved to treat one another more important than yourself. So yeah, hitting all the elements there of joy. And I think I don't know, to me, in my experience, it's been hard. It's hard to see that joy at first because you have to look past the sacrifice in order to see the joy. Otherwise, all you're seeing, if you're looking at yourself, is just the sacrifice.
Yeah. Well, I said, for the joy set before him, he endured the cross, suffering its shame. I mean,
exactly.
Jesus looking to, beyond the immediate to the eternal. One of the most vital qualities I want our kids to have, I want them to play. I appreciate you bringing that up. Play with joy. We talk about that a lot because, especially in athletics, a lot of times in sports, the motivation is maybe anger, it's intensity, it's fight, it's scrap, it's more of a violent type motivation.
There's aggressiveness there.
There's an aggression that sometimes loses rational thought because you're just so worked up, and we don't ever want to play against anything. Like, we're not playing against a team, and we talk a lot about playing for something, or even really playing out of a wellspring. And really, it needs to be joy. I'll tell players that if you're not coming to the practice or looking forward to getting to the gym for practice, if it's not a joyful thing, if it's a drudgery, then we need to check your spirit. We need to consider, is this damaging or helpful for you? Because if it's not a joyful, and that's not easy. It's not like it's funny, but it needs to be a joy, a passion that is positive and not a negative motivation that drives us. And so I appreciate you bringing that up about in Philippians. It starts with that. There's a joy. And we want our team to play with joy. I know we've had a lot of people that come watch games, and I've had a lot of fans that say, we just really enjoy coming to games and watching the bench. Having kids that aren't in the games involved and joyful about what's going on, as opposed to just the ones on the court. And that's when you can find that of those players who in high school played all the time because they were the best players, and now they're relegated a little bit to a lower, not a lower role, a lower importance in quotes, but they're still totally invested in what's going on with the team. Again, that's not our natural inclination in our spirit of giving ourselves, but that's when you see it.
What is that? How you cultivate, players and deal with them? Is it time and patience and observation, or what is that?
Yeah, I think so. I think just to have a player realize, all right, this is not what I've always done. Every one of our players that comes pretty much in high school was the best player on their team or someone that played all the time. And to communicate with them early on, even before they get here, and then while they're here, of saying, listen, right now, just keep working. We see where you're going to be, but right now, most likely when games come, we'll tell them in individual meetings, there's a good chance you will not play in games. As a freshman, sometimes it takes a year. Even we've had kids that by their junior year still are now just breaking into playing whatever you would want to call meaningful minutes. But they need to know that, and if they understand that, and I think if they know that we are for them in the long run, it's not that we're just wanting to have them here for some, I don't even know what reason. They can absorb that and be behind it as opposed to just putting up with it. We don't want a kid just, okay, well, whatever you say, and really buy into those roles. But it takes time, and we want them to know that we're doing things for the long term, not for the immediate. Mm-hmm.
And you're building up their skill, I imagine, during this time. I think sometimes this has been a big life lesson for me is patience isn't just really about waiting. It's about, doing something in the meantime. Mm-hmm. It's about really growing and harnessing your abilities and your skills to be ready for the time to come.
Right. And that, again, for some of our, like I'm an Ashton Duncan. I don't know if Coach Duncan's a men's coach. Ashton, tremendous person, tremendous player at Trinity High School. Freshman year, really didn't play. Sophomore year, didn't play. But like you're saying, she was working. She did extra work. She invested. She cared enough about the team and enough about herself to just continue to grow. I mean, by her junior year, what a tremendous player. She became an amazing player on both ends of the floor. Whereas coming in from high school, she was really a good shooter. And she was a good offensive player. But she developed every part of her game and became incredibly brilliant on the court. What you say works out in people's lives. In reality, when they take that time, the common response is, well, I'm just going to go somewhere that says I can play now. And then they never maybe develop all of those wide range of skills that would make them better suited for all kinds of things in life because they just think, well, I'm just going to jump and do something different. I just believe patience is, for all of us, for me too, I've got to learn to be more patient with a player that, well, these, you lose some players that had a lot of experience. I've got to realize, okay, it took time for them to get there. I shouldn't expect my sophomores this year to already have what those kids didn't get to their junior or senior year. So patience, it doesn't just work in those. It's got to work in me too.
Mm-hmm. So with that idea, because I know you hear even some horror stories about coaching too. How do you push someone without damaging them, but making them striving to making them better?
Yeah, that searching so much for us. It's the ability to, the importance we put on in searching for kids that are intrinsically motivated and not feeling like, yeah, that kid's really talented, but man, I'm going to have to stay on their rear end to get them to do anything. Because That does create frustration in the coach. It creates maybe even a wall between the two of us that if I treat them one way off the court, another way on the court, there's some disconnect there of we don't want a player to come to LCU and 6 months into their experience say, well, this is not what I thought it was going to be like, or the coaches aren't who I thought they were. We want to have a consistency. So that challenging of a kid, we want to catch them doing it right and really push that, as opposed to having a practice where every time they do something, we're just finding it wrong, 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 punish it, wrong, punish it, wrong, punish it. We want to find it right, praise it. And when there's lapses in performance, we address it. A lot of times the best way for that is to get if we video practice video games, sit down with a kid and watch video and show them.
Yeah.
When they can see themselves not performing to a level that they even want to be at, a lot of times that's the best motivator. Because honestly, sometimes, we've all been there, done that. We thought we did something, and then we hear a recording, or we see something, or we see a video of what we did, and we're like, oh, I didn't know I did that.
Yeah.
And so when we can self-evaluate effectively, that takes away some of that pressure of a coach saying, having to constantly challenge a kid.
My mentor in music said that there are two things that'll never lie to you: the metronome and the mirror. They will never lie to you.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, as a musician, I'm sure you've heard, like, you performed, you did something, and either you didn't feel good about it and you find out later, well, that was really good, or the other way around. That's very common. Even as a coach, after a game, I might feel, man, we just didn't play very good. Maybe we happened to win the game, and then I watched the video, I thought, well, we did better than I thought. Or the inverse happens often too.
You spoke a lot earlier about the heart of a player. And to sum all of the things up, you were very eloquent in what you were saying. And from what I gleaned from that, just to reduce it, is heart. You're looking for someone who has all of those qualities of service. And that's directly parallel to what the Bible tells us to do in our fellow man. And I'm glad that you're teaching that as a mantra to your players. My opinion shouldn't matter to you. You're the coach and you're our guest here, but I'm drawing a lot of parallels from what you're saying with service in a congregation and service to God, and how even the things that we're talking about self-analysis, getting better at all our skills, multiplying our talents, those are wonderful life lessons that you're teaching your players, and something that I might not necessarily have gotten in my college athletic experience. And so I congratulate you on that mindset. That's so wonderful and so healthy. And I wish you absolutely the best in all of your endeavors, coaching.
Well, I appreciate that. It's the good opportunity, like at Lubbock Christian University, where there really aren't any walls set up between what we can do with our players, what we can tell our players, what we can, quote, demand of our players behaviorally, just in the way they live life. There's not many shackles put on us in terms of trying to develop those kids in more ways than just sports. And so LCU is a great place to have those opportunities to do it. And again, having kids that from families that care about that to begin with, they know they're getting into something more than just basketball. If a kid's coming to LCU just because they love basketball and they want to further their basketball career, I've told them it's not the place for you, because basketball's not that big a deal. Sports are not that important. I've done some talks different places, and really one of my key points is that sports are stupid. In the big pictures, the way we handle them, how much we put into them, how much it affects our lives and in dangerous ways. At times, sports has gotten out of kilter in our culture, but teams are amazing. Teams are awesome. And without sports, you probably aren't going to have many teams.
Sure.
And so, although, there's a worship team, there's teams in every setting, but we think of teams in terms of sports so much. There's so much to learn from team and from competition.
To be applied outside.
Yeah, and so again, I'm not on a let's cancel all sports crusade, but at the same time, let's consider what we're really doing with it. And if it's creating more damage than good, then every individual in a family needs to consider, should we be doing this?
You said competition. Could you flesh that out a little more? Because I'm interested in your opinion on that. I know from competition, at least in the arts, of course, I played football in college and all of that, and I made a pretty seamless transition from playing college football, Division III at Austin College, to then getting into musical theater. And then I had studied music and that kind of stuff. But actually, team environment and the way that I say about doing art in a collaborative environment is that there are no losers. And so from there, it basically has all of the benefits of athletics and, in my opinion, none of the negatives. Of course, that being said, you can also tell that I was not on a winning team whenever I played. So we typically lost. And so I have that sort of mindset about it. Would you reflect that in your own experience, or have a different opinion?
Yeah, we again, I think back to, I think Paul writes in Corinthians, stop comparing yourselves with each other. You know, the comparison, I say the worst trap we can get in, on the court is a comparison trap. Don't go into the comparison, because you're always going to find someone better than you, someone worse than you. Just because you win a game doesn't mean you played well. And just because you lose a game doesn't mean you didn't play well. And so that concept of just trying to play to a certain level, we want to get as good as we can be. I mean, to me, there's a standard of play that our players know in practice or in a game when they've sort of met or they've got approached the standard as opposed to won the drill. We try not to in practice, punish a team. All right, say we're going to do, a 3-on-3 drill, whatever. We don't do a lot of, all right, if the team that loses is going to run, the team that wins, you don't have to run, whatever. Because that creates if we win, we should be happy. If we lose, we're punished. And that mentality, I just think is dangerous. It creates some of that fierce fighting, that animal mentality of survival. But it doesn't create hey, we actually could have won that drill, but really not played well at all. So there's times both teams will run. If I don't feel like the play was very good, there's times we don't even worry. The score was whatever, 14-6, but hey, that team just happened to miss 3 wide open shots. And you guys banked in a 3. A couple different things would have made that game totally different.
Absolutely.
And so that mentality of losing, winning, I just hate the question most of us ask of a little kid in his sports uniform at Chick-fil-A on Saturday. If we see a kid come in, the first question we ask is, did you win?
Yeah.
Which right then it starts making that kid, if they lost, And so we create in this, at the end of the game, sports has a scoreboard. We would love to be having more points, but that doesn't validate our worth or how good we are. It just puts another win in our column. But our mentality has been for a lot of years, we say we just want to go 1-0 today, but that doesn't necessarily mean only on game days. I go back to Jesus saying, what's the greatest command? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So at the end of the day, can we go 1-0 today in that standard? That's pretty tough. There's some days I'm sure all of us we lost today.
Absolutely.
I did nothing that benefited anybody but myself.
Yeah.
So, tomorrow, all right. His mercies are new every morning. Tomorrow, hey, we're going to try to go 1-0 the next day. And so put the past behind us. Don't worry about too much about the future, and just let's get better today. So on our locker room going in both doors, the training room and the other one, there's a sign that says today matters. Just today matters. So in competition, sometimes today didn't work out our way. At the same time, it's not just winning and losing. But in sports, underachieving is so common. You've heard those teams, somebody says, man, that kid or that team, they're overachievers. I just think that I just don't have any belief in that. Just it's so uncommon that people actually achieve what they can. And so we just let's just achieve. If we can get as close to as good as we can be, that's plenty. But the problem is most teams are going to underachieve, and we get comfortable in that, or we maybe blame it on something. But just trying to, that's my only ask for a team. Let's just get as good as we can be. And we have to be at peace then with what happens.
That's awesome.
You had quoted by not comparing 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 12, which says, "For we would not dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who recommend themselves. But when they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves with themselves, they are without understanding." That's all about themselves. "But we will not boast beyond certain limits, but we will confine our boasting according to the limits of the work of which God has appointed us, that reaches even as far as you." And he goes down to verse 17, "For the one who boasts must boast in the Lord." It's a totally different mindset than trying to find some sort of strength within ourselves. That's always the kind of the message of the culture. What is find yourself, right? Search for yourself.
Self-care.
Yeah,
That's right.
self-care. But he's saying if there's going to be any boasting, any pride at all, there should be, pride in the one that can give you strength.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you have an amazing outlook of saying self-achievement is obtainable by everybody. And so we would be amiss without mentioning 1 Corinthians 9, verse 24, starting, "Do you not know that those who run a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. Then they do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable." And this is an amazing takeaway point. "Therefore, I run in such a way as not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air, but I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified." Paul is very forethinking about his own personal self-control. Can you speak to that just a few minutes about how you bridle your body and make it your slave?
Yeah, that, coaching, being involved in athletics over the years, there has to be, a vision of what you're doing beyond just the actual act of playing on the court. The nutritional part of it, the just staying in shape in the off season, all of that, those extra things that go into it. So even as a coach, over the years, back when I was coaching high school, sometimes, I'd play with the kids in practice if they needed someone. I always liked to being active. And so personally for me, I've always wanted to be self-disciplined in terms of exercise, running, working out, doing things to keep me in tune with how hard they're working. Now, I can't physically do anything near what our girls do. At the same time, I want to be self-disciplined in one way because it's helpful, another way because in some ways I'm undisciplined. I like chocolate. I try to stay disciplined, physically active in order to be undisciplined with my nutrition. That sort of sounds terrible, but
No, I get it.
I like sodas. I like, pizza. I like chocolate. So I'm very undisciplined in nutritionally in terms of my diet. I guess I counteract that with trying to stay as active as I can. And so just being disciplined in that, being disciplined in, reading, trying to continue to feed my mind things that'll be helpful and for me and for others. Those disciplines of my wife helps me be disciplined in keeping the house orderly, keeping clean. Discipline with my time. I really want our team to be a team that's highly efficient. I think a lot of times we can spend a lot of time at work but not get anything done. I want to learn, hey, let's get in, let's work real hard for a short time instead of working mediocre for a long time.
Yeah.
And it gives the team a little more joy because they know we're not going to be here for more than an hour and 10 minutes. All those little things of disciplining ourselves in limits and how we behave and things we say. A lot of times as a coach, it'd be easy to just blurt out whatever comes into the mind, but thinking, okay, trying to discipline our tongue. James talks about how, just that discipline, you can really lose a lot of impact on people with just something you say at the spur of the moment. So a lot of different ways.
That's amazing.
So does your team make you a better person, more disciplined person, you could say?
Definitely. Yeah, on 100%. I mean, the responsibility of, first of all, maybe leading or being in charge of a team, it is a heavy responsibility. For high school, coaching boys at that age, you really want to give them a disciplined role model for themselves, but then for the college women, they are an example to me, but it's also a big responsibility to take a family's daughter, take them away from home, put them in an environment of college, which could be, it could be a dangerous situation.
Right.
Yeah.
Even in a Christian school, there's so many opportunities. And so, but that responsibility has definitely made me a better, more thoughtful person in terms of this is more than just getting on the court and shooting baskets.
Yeah. That's such an amazing outlook on life. I told George recently that I always need to behave that I always have that camera pointed at me. And so it's a great way to look at life, is that to set an example for your students, for your athletes, and let that be a mantra for life. You've been coaching now for a couple decades now, you said, 20-something years.
This is my 35th year. I had 20 years in college and 15 in high school.
Awesome. Do you have any players that come back and visit and say hey and tell you how much they appreciate you?
Well, maybe see a lot of players. I don't know if they appreciate me, but I do get a chance to see a lot of players. Just last night I was at a high school girls game, and one of my players that played JV boys basketball at Monterey back in the late 80s, his name's Javad. He's now doing great work in the community. He was there with his wife and said hi to him. So many of our alumni at LCU, we had an alumni event not long ago at LCU. Casey Wilson, matter of fact, put it on, and a lot of players from years past, even players from before I was there, former LCU players that come that are involved now and supporting our program. But yeah, the years at Monterey, the years at Cooper doing boys. I went to one of the games I went to last night. One of my former Cooper boys players was the coach of Plainview.
Wow.
So there's so much connection, and that's the joy of it, is the connection of last year's seniors that I told you graduated at our game on Saturday night were just in the stands hooping and hollering and really involved. And that connection, if it's not there after they leave, it's sort of concerning that maybe I did not do an effective enough job with them. So that is definitely a blessing of all those years of running into those kids, running into those ladies or men now, and having their children in our camps in the summer, and maybe even eventually having their kids on our team.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Amazing legacy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, that's all I have. Do you have anything else?
No, Coach, I appreciate you for being here. Thank you. It's a great chat to have you here.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. That's neat. Now you're going to sing for us?
I can. I'll blow the microphone out. We'll do some Donizetti now. No, okay. Maybe after.
But hey, if you are listening and you like what you hear, make sure to like, subscribe, all that stuff. That will really help us out wherever you listen. If you live here or if you live and you're listening somewhere else, go find a church. That's going to help, build a team, be a part of people that are, trying to live for God as well. It's going to help build your faith. And, well, like always, go so.